Hello and welcome to this special edition of Brief.IL, the English podcast of the INSS. I'm Remy Daniel, researcher at the INSS and responsible for research on Europe at the Institute. And I have here with me today a very special guest, Ambassador David Konecký. Welcome.
Thank you, Remy.
And thank you for being with us. I have here a short presentation of your career, but it's a very impressive one. You've been an ambassador and a diplomat for the Czech Republic for more than 20 years, and you've served in different positions, mostly on security, transatlantic issues, EU issues, and you are now serving as permanent representative and head of the Czech delegation to NATO. Maybe I will say to our viewers and listeners that it's your second visit at the INSS. You've now come to the INSS for the second time after a NATO summit to comment on the summit with our researchers and with our guests. So thank you very much for giving us today the opportunity also to discuss these issues in favor of our listeners and the listeners of the podcast. So my first question will be very simple. So we are a few days after a NATO summit that was much expected because NATO went through a quite complicated year, let's say like that, with some very strong and problematic statements coming from different leaders of NATO. The summit happened. Everyone was there. There was a common declaration at the end of the summit. How would you summarize both the summit and its results?
Yeah, thank you, Remy. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks for the Institute to cooperate with us. Just to start, that our embassy here in Israel serves as NATO contact point embassy. That's the instrument which the NATO has for all the partner countries. It's for 2 years. We are finishing our second year, and we will serve another two-year term. Very happy to do it. So thank you for the invitation.
Very happy to have you as contact point.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Your question was on the summit and the outcome of the summit and how important that is for NATO as the organization, but I would say also for the Czech Republic and its member states. To summarize it very simply, NATO is strong. And the strength of NATO is assured by the last summit in Ankara, which finished last week. It was a bit different summit than the summit we had a year ago in Hague. In Hague, it was a summit which set the new strategic course for NATO. And this strategic course, with very simplified way of saying that, was summarized in the number 5% defense spending by the year 2035. That's written in the Hague Summit Declaration. The number is composed by two numbers, 3.5 in so-called core defense spending, hard military, real fighting capacities, and then 1.5% for so-called defense-related or soft spending. Also important, as one of the really buzzwords in NATO is whole of government, whole of society approach. None of this has to be explained here in Israel. You understand very well what this means, and actually very happy to be here in the Israel to compare the notes and to have the open debate. So the summit in Ankara was the summit which checked on the commitment. Last year in Hague we did the commitment, and 1 year after that, the summit in Ankara was checking how the commitment is fulfilled, how serious we are about the commitment. And the report is clear. All the allies are serious and the alliance is strong.
So you are rather positive on what happened. And do you think that all the tensions that have existed for the last year, we can mention only in a few words Greenland or the difference even regarding the crisis in the Middle East, do you think that the summit has proven that NATO had still the capabilities to put these tensions aside and to continue moving forward?
Yeah, that's precisely how I would characterize. the summit is, in a nutshell, a meeting of the highest level politicians of the countries. So, of course, when the politicians meet, the politics is at the table, right? When the ambassadors meet, it's more about the policy, which is set down by politics, right? For example, in Czech, we don't have this distinction in our language. I don't know how is it in Hebrew, but in English, there is a distinction between politics and policy, right? And the summit level is where the politics is meeting and is setting the policy, which is then fulfilled by the ambassadors. So the summit, indeed, unavoidably has to also incorporate all the other things which are not directly connected to NATO, right? So, for example, the situation in Hormuz is not directly connected to NATO. We see the implications, but there is not call for the NATO mission, for example, not to be involved by the NATO. But of course, there are the repercussions. And NATO, for example, is doing something which is called horizon scanning all the time. So we are, of course, evaluating, we are being informed, we are evaluating possible impact. But it's a different situation than, for example, our operations in the Balkans, where we are concretely involved. So that's just one example for you to imagine how this works.
And one of the points you mentioned is actually burden sharing, something that we heard a lot since Trump arrived for the first time in the White House, but it's also a long-term tendency of the policy of the United States, which is having the European more, making more, investing more, playing a bigger role in the defense of Europe. How can you assess right now, after the Hague summit, but also years of changes within Europe, how do you see Europe as a geopolitical partner? How you see its military strength? Is Europe actually stronger and ready to face the threats it faces?
Yeah, in the declaration which you mentioned, which is quite short, and I recommend everybody to read it because it's
not long to read. Yeah, it's
that's the guidance for us. It speaks very clearly about stronger Europe in the stronger NATO. This is, in other words, what you have mentioned. There is also other phrase which is called NATO will become more European while remaining transatlantic. That's again other way to say that. Trump administration, or President Trump, during his first term came to NATO to rebalance the burden which is carried by each and every ally. And it's true, and it could be proven by the numbers, that the balance was too heavy at the US part, right? So first, during his first administration, there was the rebalancing, which started towards so-called 2%. That was Wales' commitment. It was 2014, and then till 2024, every ally should have been at 2%. And then, when the new Trump administration, or the second Trump administration was coming, it was expected that this trend will continue. I will say that it's not connected to this administration. I think this is right now the approach of the US as the entity, as the ally, towards the rest of the alliance. So that the burden must be shifted to Europe, and Europe must have major role in conventional deterrence and defense. That is something which the Europeans agreed to. They agreed to in Hague, because you need the defense spending to fulfill it, and they have shown in Ankara that they are delivering. So the burden is shifting, and the result of the burden shifting will be indeed, as you said, more powerful Europe, or European allies, I would say. First. Second, this power will be a real power. So you are a researcher, you know the difference between the power and, for example, the military power, which is just part of it. So the power as such has different components. And that is something, what I have said, is connected to this 1.5% on defense-related spending, so-called soft spending, that, the power is also, for example, the power of resilience, that you are able to withstand the attack. So ultimately, nobody wants to attack you because they know that they will not be successful. That's part of the deterrence. So the concept is indeed very broad. But I see the Europe, and I insist here on the Europe, being more stronger and more powerful actor in the international relationship. The question, of course, is how does the European Union relate to this concept of Europe, which I have just mentioned? And again, this is another strategic change which is happening right now, and that is that the Europe is 100% aligned with the ambition which is set by European allies or all allies in NATO, and the EU is helping them to fulfill the ambition. So there is no own ambition in the European Union which would not be, I would not say coordinated, but cohesive with the NATO goals. So this is really unprecedented, and if the trend continues as it is now, the Europe will become the stronger actor in the international relations.
Well, you're presenting once again a very positive image, but maybe I know that it's sometimes we were talking about politicians. I know how good diplomats are at presenting the situation under the better light, but even though you are very good at it, maybe what could be the challenges that could either postpone or delay or even prevent this more optimistic scenario from really happening? So you are saying Europe is aligned, there is agreement actually with the US, the EU will play its part and it's going in the same direction. Still, we are hearing about threats that may come very, very quickly from Moscow, for example. So there are still a lot of challenges. How do you assess the challenges over Europe and its security in comparison to its more optimistic and quite impressive plan for getting stronger?
Yeah, thank you for recognizing that diplomats are good in explaining the things in a way which is not escalatory, right? Sometimes we have to manage the escalation, but our normal job is, to avoid the escalation, right? But it's very correct observation. What we are creating in NATO right now is a box, right? If I should illustrate it, it's a box. And the box has to be filled with the content. And we know that without the content, the box will collapse. So we are not out of the woods. So that's why I am very positive about we have built the box. We know how the box looks like. We know what should be filled in. And now the biggest task is how you fill it in, right? Actually, which capabilities you are able to bring in the box. First, in quality which you need, and second, in time which you need. And this is something which goes well beyond the government decisions about the level of the defense spending, but it goes deeper into the defense industries, for example. It goes deeper into the supply chains. It goes deeper into innovation and technology, how you plug in the innovation and technology into your product, so you are sure that you are not buying something which is already obsolete. Very good example of this phenomenon is the Ukraine and the drones, which are changing in the matter of weeks. Electronic countermeasures, for example, are really something which is present at the battlefield. So all these effects have to be taken in. And our main goal is to fill the box in the right time. This is actually what the US is expecting us to do, and this is what the Europeans and Canada have agreed to do. So exactly what you identified, the challenge is there, and this is the main challenge. On the other hand, the trend towards the fulfillment is very clear. Defense industry in Europe is very strong, also in the Czech Republic. A bit of advertisement, but it's actually true. We have very strong defense industry, which has importance well beyond the borders of the Czech Republic, and we are proud of it. Second, there are money actually being flowing into the industry, and the third is that you could really identify the coordinated efforts of several countries. Group of countries, like so-called capability coalitions, and so all of this is very positive. On the other hand, one of the biggest challenges from the security point of view is not to analyze the threat. The threat is clear for NATO. You will find it at the beginning of the declaration: long-term threat from Russia, persistent threat from terrorism. Right? Two threats, the basis of everything what we are doing in NATO, and we are finding the response. The challenge is not to analyze what is the main threat, but how this threat could be manifested. And one of the biggest manifestations of the threat, which is also quite difficult to defend against, are the ballistic missiles. And again, I don't have to explain this in Israel, and you have very good solution. But it's, for example, ballistic missiles. And against the ballistic missiles, one of the best systems you can have is the Patriot from the US. But it's commonly known fact that the production of the system and the production of the missiles is still very low. Right? So ramping up the production will take some time. So there are some hurdles. Even if you, for example, decide to go for the Patriot because you say, okay, this is what I need for the defense of the territory, you might not get it in the few years unless something changes at the side of the U.S. industry. And to be fair, the U.S. industry is also ramping up. So it's kind of it's like moving stones, few moving stones, which are creating the picture, and these stones are moving all the time. And our main goal is to keep the picture coherent, right? So these stones are not going in the different direction, and at the end of the day, you don't have the result. So you very correctly identify that we are not out of the woods, and it's actually quite a hard labor in front of us.
And in this hard labor, you're here as a representative of the Czech Republic. What is the role of your country? We hear a lot about Trump saying this and that. Sometimes the French president answers. I have the impression that the Czech representatives are making a more discreet job. You mentioned the Czech industry as an important one. So in this complicated environment with the challenges that you've mentioned, how can a country like you have a strong impact, and how is it doing it right now?
For the Czech Republic, it's quite simple. The first, we act in our self-interest, as everybody acts in the self-interest, and our self-interest have been defined already in 1993 when the Czech Republic was established after the dissolution of Czechoslovakia. And this self-interest was called membership of NATO and in the EU is our pillars for our defense, security and prosperity ultimately. So we are acting in our self-interest, and we are acting effectively to preserve these two organizations. Focusing on the NATO, our role, I think, is a threefold. The first, to show that our tasks, which are assigned to us in the NATO, and it's if you are familiar with the process of so-called NATO defense planning, which is at the core of the military capabilities which we are building together with allies, is indeed something which ends on the paper with the capabilities which are assigned and confirmed in the vote by all countries, assigned to each and every country. And you are expected to fulfill these capability targets. So that's one thing, that is something which is required from each and every ally, and we know what is our burden, and we should be able to prove, okay, this is our share, and we are fulfilling the share. So that's first, that's very topical. The second is to inject our expertise in NATO to steer it in the right way. NATO is not only the box which I described filled with the tools, which is the most important, and we have to do it, but also the way how you use the tools. And with certain humbleness, I think we have very good experience in some geographic locations, closer or a bit more further from Europe, and that is actually what we can inject into our debates and how the strategic positioning and different concepts which are being developed in an alliance could be influenced. So that's second. And the third is, of course, to act in a way discreetly in the group, in different coalitions, diplomacy, different channels, including the business, in a way which amalgamates the NATO and the Euro-Atlantic community. And there is no secret that, for example, our relationships to the US, something which we call transatlantic bond in NATO, but we also call it transatlantic bond in our bilateral relations, is very strong from the very beginning of the Czech Republic, and we act on it.
Now, because we have only a few minutes left in our interview, and because we are in Tel Aviv after all, we'll move maybe to the Middle East. And you mentioned a very short declaration of the summit. It mentions very few subjects, but there is one Middle Eastern subject that is mentioned, which is Iran and the opposition of NATO to a nuclear Iran and the demand by NATO that the Straits of Hormuz be opened. You mentioned two threats that are considered more structural, let's say. You said Russia and terrorism. Maybe Iran is linked to terrorism, but if you look at these three different threats, Russia, terrorism, Iran, how can you maybe create a hierarchy between them? A lot of Israelis will tell you that they are all connected in a certain way. How does the Middle East enter the geopolitical view of NATO towards its threats?
Purely from a strategic documents point of view, it's Russia and terrorism, and everything is connected to it. So that's first. Second, if you look at Iran as the subject or as a threat, we see connection to both, actually, to Russia, because there is proven link from Iran to Russia, to Russian aggression against the Ukraine, Shahed drones, for example, quite famous example. And the second, there is the connection of the terrorism to the activities of the Iranian regime, right? So, these things are inherently present there. The second thing is to understand the declaration correctly. It was the mentioning of Iran is the positioning of the whole NATO to the issue, right? So it means that the agreement in the NATO is that no nuclear weapon for Iran and Strait of Hormuz should be open. Of course, the very logical question, what could be done about it, right? And that is not at the same level as the reaction for the Russian or terrorism threat at this very strategic, conceptual, institutional level. But still, we are focusing on that from the situational point of view, intelligence point of view, to understand what's happening. But we also know, and that is very clear, that there is a connection between what's happening here in the region and what's happening in the Euro-Atlantic area. Not only because of when the US is using part of their military power in the area, this part is not available in Europe if it would be needed. I'm not saying that all of them is needed, but that is quite simple. And the second thing is we have seen the economic fallout from the situation from the blockade of Hormuz. And again, if you go in the logical chain, if there is economy not functioning, there is not enough money for the defense, there will not be enough spending for the industry, there might be shortage of some materials, and you go, right, in the direction and you see all the implications. So by and large, NATO is as the actor, not part of the thinking how to, or planning some kind of involvement in the region. But what is happening is that many member states, including the Czech Republic, is preparing for the moment where we could inject our assistance into the solution of the whole situation. In our case, it's a very unique surveillance passive technology which could be used for the situational overview. So, and that was also part of the summit, the willingness of allies to actually at certain point come to assist with the situation. So that's actually the connection.
And maybe as a last question, we can make Israel enter all this reflection. You, in your answers, you mentioned common shared threats, shared needs, shared issues that we have to deal with. You are the the country that represents NATO in Israel. You mentioned now the situation in the Middle East. Maybe as a Czech ambassador talking to an Israeli podcast, how do you see the relation between the Czech Republic and Israel, and maybe through the Czech Republic with NATO playing a role in all these developments and in all these efforts that both sides have to do?
Yeah, I have mentioned that the Czech Republic had from the very beginning, NATO and the EU as the strategic goals. There is also quite visible part of our strategic orientation, and that's the excellent relations with Israel, right? So that is something which is in the DNA of our security and foreign policy. What you have mentioned is perfectly right. You have many experience in many areas, not speaking only about military, but speaking about cyber area, for example, defense industry, innovation, excellent. I have met many representatives of the Israeli companies here, and it's just excellent what you are doing. We have been discussing drones, ballistic missiles, anti-drone system, anti-missile system. All these things, of course, are in huge demand. And the question is, what is the way how to transfer this knowledge to us first? As I said, the Czech Republic, as any other state, is acting in its own self-interest, but also ultimately to give it also for the use to the allies or for example, members of the European Union, if there is this interest. Of course, the question is how to do it correctly, how to do it in the right way. But rest assured that the Czech Republic is here, and we are the ones who know the value of it, and we will be actively looking for the ways how to do it.
Well, thank you very much for these words and for this commitment. And more specifically, I know you have a lot of meetings while you are in Israel, and that's why I particularly appreciate the time that you have taken here at the INSS, at the conference about the NATO summit, and here for our podcast. Thank you very much for your insightful answers, and I hope we will see you again at the Institute. We will welcome you anytime with great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it, Remy. Thank you very much.